Hello and welcome to the lecture of International Business Environment. In this lecture we will going to have a discussion on the international trade and environment. Now in this block 5, that is contemporary development and issue, we will going to discuss on the related factors of environment and international trade. That is how international trade practices are better and performed in the right manner. So that is unit 17. So topics today we will going to cover our introduction, trade versus environment, international institution dealing with environment, GATT and WTO and environmental agenda, multilateral environmental agreement, regulatory measures and economic instrument, achievement of urgency round of negotiation. So in this basically unit we will going to have a discussion on all the contemporary issues related to the development in the trade international and yes at the right practices of that environmental factor. तो ये सेशन ज़्यादा इसी पर emphasize कर रहा है कि क्या-क्या agendas discuss हुए, किस तरीके की regulations GATT और WTO ने introduce की just to bringing out the right practices for the environment, कि trade को increase करने के लिए और yes international बेनिफिट्स और एक्सपोर्ट को इंक्रीज करने के लिए कभी इन्वायरमेंटल इश्यूज या इन्वायरमेंटल हार्म नहीं होना चाहिए एंड इन्हीं सब इश्यूज से सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट के कॉन्सेप्ट्स को राइज अप किया गया. सो द जेनेरिक एंड द ग्रोथ ऑफ अ मल्टीलेटरल ट्रेड सिस्टम and the function of a GATT and its successor of WTO was basically considered in it. Some exposure has also obtained on that area, basically bringing out, like for example in the previous session we discussed about the settlement of disputes. So these all are the further exposures of international trade practices कि dispute settlements करनी है, environmental upgradations देखनी है. So after having this much of understanding, now we will focusing on environmental factors now. So in this learned about one of the very contemporary and development issues that how we will going to improve that, and yes what are those environmental factor which increasingly influencing the courses and the directions of the international trade. So all these factors, environmental factors which actually putting an effect on the international trades. If we talk about trade versus environment, yes, that is what trade always need a certain kind of resources. Through this resources, the actual product comes into a picture, and then that with the help of that product or the existence of that product is leads to the trade. So in that case, there is a big relationship with the trade and environment, but it's never be considered. In 1960, the environmental problems was basically generated by industrial polluted surface. Then this is the one of a very major issue which call for the environmental safeguard and bringing out those standards which bringing out the right practices. If we talk about the trade economists, they basically try to tackle the environmental problems separately. They basically come up with the international agreement on the environment standard and policies. They basically use the free trade is the best use or apply that the free trade is one of the best method for that developing countries to enabling all their technologies and yes at the same time from the right practices of that technology. In 1992, it's one of a major agreement, or we can say that the discussion which was occurred in the Earth Smith at Rio. That Smith on the Rio, they basically come up with the new idea that is sustainable development through trade. That means they basically stressed on the need and the call of the environment, and they basically promote the sustainable development concept that it is required in each and every practices of a trade. The international institution dealing with the environment, there are many institutes which are dealing with the environmental factors. In these institutions, the United Nations General Assembly was working on it, and they come up with the certain practices. That is, General Assembly of United Nations was one of the highest level intergovernmental mechanism who basically have the UNCED, which is the Agenda 21 of Rio de Janeiro in 1992, because Earth Smith they come up with this concept, and Agenda 21 is completely discussing about that how we will going to benefit our trade as well as benefiting our environment. So Agenda 21 is basically the non-binding voluntary implemented action plan of United Nations, which basically focusing on the sustainable development. They basically come up with the 4 sessions. Then the very first session is discussing about the social and economical factors. Second discussed about the conservation and management of resources for the development. Session third is basically discussing about strengthening the role of a major goals. Then session 4 is basically discussing about the means of implementations. So these 4 sessions were discussed about in the Agenda 21, and they are basically come up with the council, that is Economic and Social Council. General Assembly basically assist by the Economic and Social Counseling. The another reference of this is they basically come up with the monitoring progress on the implementation of Agenda 21. They targeted the GNPs for developed countries for the overseas development assistance, that they are going to provide those assistance, and yes, at the same time reviewing the advocacy of financing and transferring of that technology. They basically working on to provide the recommendations also to the General Assembly through Economic and Social Council. So these are all the terms of references was used in the Union Commission of Sustainable Development. The Union Environmental Program is the another institution which is performing for the betterment of environment. So UNEP is basically working to provide the assistance to the developing country having the right practices for their environmental safeguards. Environment में को safeguard करने के लिए sound practices के लिए sound investment के लिए उन्हें assist करना, sustainable development में किस तरह से काम करेंगे, उन सब workings में आना, that was the another efficient, or we can say that the factor was taken care by UN Environmental Program. And they basically, these activity covers the wider range of issues regarding the atmosphere, regarding the marine and the territorial economic system. जितना भी ecosystem है, environmental factors हैं, and yes, the marine related जितने factors हैं, उन पर ज़्यादा concentrate किया गया था in UNEP. So it's the another institution for solving out the environmental factors. So the WTO is a General Council for establishing that new committee on the trade and environment, and these committee basically work to covering up all the areas of a multilateral trading systems. जितनी भी companies multilateral trading systems में हैं, उनकी trade practices को address करने के लिए कि yes, you have to consider the problems related to your trade and environment. You have to consider the right practices of the environment कि आपके trades जो हैं वो किसी तरीके से environmental effective ना हो. So the two important parameter which is guided by WTO regarding this work is the WTO competencies for the policy coordination in this area. That is what they will come up with the certain policies coordination, bringing out the policies practices, and another is the problem of policy coordination of protecting the environment. And one is the कि वो बहुत सारी policies coordinations पर काम कर रहे थे कि how we will can relate all these policies to the environmental factor, and yes, come up with all these problems जिसकी वजह से एक environmental issues आते हैं और उन problems को हम कैसे resolve कर सकते हैं. So resolving in a manner that uphold and safeguard the principle of multilateral, यानी कि principle of multilateral भी harm ना हो, and yes, at the same time हम लोग एक right policies के साथ उन problems का solutions भी निकाल सकते. So that is what the two agenda, or we can say that the two parameters of WTO was used for the environmental benefit. So in this session we will basically introduce with that all the environmental and trade concept in which whole block is performing. So that in this we will get the idea about yes, Agenda 21. We get what Earth Smith Rio was basically discussed in 1992, and we get an idea about all those WTO practices was taken care, and what are those institutes who are performing for the safeguard of environment. So this is all about for this section. So we are winding up here. Thank you so much. IGNOU.